Welcome back to Tea Time at Physics. Today we have Vesi here. Vesi is a licensed social worker and she helps a lot of people deal with life issues. And she had office out in Wellesley and we are connected because I found her approach quite unique compared to all the other therapists that I've met in the past. And we're going to dive into a conversation about just what that is. So Vesi, I'm just going to jump right in. Tell us some tools that you use that our listener can use to help them with when they feel anxious. What are some tools that you like to use?
Sure. I'll share three of my favorites. How about that? My first one, and again, when it comes to anxiety, the first thing that I usually touch base on, it has to do with the breath. And I get the eye rolls from people because, oh my gosh, breathing, okay. But what happens is if you just break down anxiety to a physiological response, is the fight or flight system kicks in, which is our sympathetic nervous system. That's what increased heart rate, we start to sweat, we get all nervous, or we kind of tense up and freeze up. And that sends the message to the brain of danger, danger, danger. So there's kind of, again, what kicks off the anxiety cycle is, thoughts, behaviors, emotions. We perceive that there's a threat. The thought is, oh my gosh, there's some kind of threat. Doesn't matter what it is. And then our emotions are fear, or again, anxiety comes up. And then the behavior could be, I must avoid it, or I must do this, or I must do that. That's kind of what we've learned. And the reason I bring up the breath as the first step is we want to ground, right? We want to pause, we want to ground. My favorite one is the square breath. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's basically 4 counts in. We breathe in, we hold for 4, we exhale for 4, and then we hold for 4 again, and then we repeat for maybe 30 seconds to a minute. And what that does is slows the heart rate down. When the heart rate slows down, sends the message to the brain, I'm okay. And then that whole cycle gets reversed, because oftentimes people would say, oh my gosh, I just go 0 to 100, right? Like something happens and I'm off to the races. And what we do with the breath is we want to ground a little bit and slow that process down so we can think a little more clearly, okay, what do I need to do next? For example, this morning I was running late to an appointment in the car. I saw that there's a lot of traffic coming up. I actually quickly had decided to just pull over and reschedule the appointment. In the past, I would have pushed through. I would have just got myself, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be late, and I'm gonna be late to the next thing. And you just immediately you feel that tension, you feel that intensity come up. Versus, thankfully I've been doing this enough, long enough now where I knew what my response will be, and that it's just not gonna set me up for the day or it's gonna be helpful. And so I just decided, you know what? I'm just going to reschedule it and not get myself to that place. But it's taken a lot of practice.
Right.
And it starts with the breath. It starts with that grounding and be able to recognize, okay, I can handle this.
I love it. So it sounds like, utilizing the breath is almost a way to trick your body into believing that, hey, you know what? This is not that big of a deal.
Yes.
This is really, it's not the end of the world, even though every small little trigger that comes in our life can feel that way.
Absolutely.
And that's something I always remind myself too. It's like, oh my God, I got all these things to do. Everything is not working the way I wanted to work. And then,
Yep.
you know what? It's okay. It's really not that.
It's going to work out.
It's going to work out. It's
Right,
not that big of a
right.
deal.
And kind of the second thing that ties up with that is an exercise I really love using is called dropping anchor. It's comes out of Russ Harris and acceptance and commitment therapy, which is one of my favorite approaches lately.
Wait, let's slow that down.
Sure.
What is it called?
Acceptance and Commitment Therapy Act. And his name is Russ Harris. His book is The Happiness Trap, is one of my main recommendations that I make with clients. And the idea behind dropping anchor is, again, it's basically grounding, but it's the idea of, acknowledging what's happening in your body. So like, for example, this morning, I can notice the tensions that are coming up. I could feel probably my heart rate starting to raise up a little as I'm watching the Google Maps, increase as I moved forward through traffic. And the idea with dropping anchor is I like to visualize like your little boat in the middle of the ocean, and you've got the 10-foot waves, swaying you. You're not gonna beat the waves, right? If you're a tiny little boat, and you can continue to fight the waves, but you're probably gonna lose that battle. Much easier, drop the anchor and stay still. Basically, stay steady, let the storm pass, and then do what you have to do. So that's kind of the idea, like being able to ground, name what's happening, Notice what's happening in your body, kind of almost doing like a quick scan. Am I holding tension? Is my heart rate starting to increase? Am I clenching my jaw? Am I clenching my fists? Like, what is happening? Am I getting hot? Am I getting cold? And then we use this method. It was like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it could be naming 5 things that you see, 4 things that you hear, 3 things that you can touch. I think it's 2 things you can smell, one thing that you can taste, or vice versa. But it could be used with anything. It could be naming 5 things that are square and 3 things that are red, or anything that, again, it kind of focuses in that moment and grounds us. So again, we can slow down the heart rate, feel kind of more calm, and then we can make a better decision. Because we all know when we're, have that response, we're off to the races.
Absolutely.
So that's my second favorite
Wow.
favorite strategy that I use.
No, I love that. So the anchor is sort of taking a moment and sort of observing what's happening in the present moment, whether
Yes.
that is your physical sensation, the way things are smelling at the moment.
Yes.
So you could take your way away, in my words, away from the future, which is, I think, a lot of people, when they get anxious, they think about what's going to happen in the future
Exactly.
based on what's happening
Well, it's
in this
actually the
situation.
uncertainty of what's going to happen in the future. It's the uncertainty that fuels the anxiety.
Yeah.
Because we want to be certain. And of course, nothing is certain.
Nothing is certain. That is the trap, right? Because
That is the trap.
we all want certainty in life, and life doesn't offer that certainty.
Nope.
Do you find that is the main theme of what's going on in most people's lives?
Usually, yes. And usually it's either, I think with anxiety, either it could be both. We could get stuck in the past, in a lot of kind of what I call like the shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? I should have done this, I should have done. So a lot of kind of negative thoughts, beating myself up, like, oh, I can't believe I said this thing, like, all of these things. Or we get really fixated on the future. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if I lose my job? What if my boss does this? What if my partner says this or that or the other thing? So again, it's that uncertainty, because the future is uncertain. There's nothing any of us can do. None of us has the crystal ball yet, so we haven't figured it out. And that's what tends to drive, I think, a lot of the anxiety. So then we could engage in certain behaviors to try to control as much as we can the situation. But again, we can only control so much. We can't control what other people are doing. We can't control the traffic, right? We can't control if our child's going to have a tantrum in 5 minutes,
Right.
usually, And so it's getting comfortable, basically being uncomfortable. I think that's the main,
I love
main
that. I
piece.
love that so much. That's sort of the mantra of how I live, because everything is so uncertain.
Yeah.
And almost the effort to try to control things like that causes more anxiety, because
Absolutely.
you realize that it doesn't work.
Absolutely. There's kind of like basically the cycle of anxiety. And the other piece, I think there's the control, and then there's also the avoidance.
Avoidance, okay.
Avoidance is the other piece that a lot of times people engage in. So avoiding certain situations, avoiding certain people, avoiding going certain places, because if you feel too uncertain, so especially comes up with social anxiety. If you get very uncomfortable being around other people, well, you just avoid the people and you feel fine, right?
Right.
But obviously that only works in the short term. In the long term, it doesn't work so well.
So what kind of tools would you use for someone with social anxiety, and they're invited to a social gathering, and they're like, these are all my friends. I'll have good times, but I don't want to do it. Like, what would you do for someone like that? Of course, everyone's different, but what are some
I
general
think,
tips?
well, with social anxiety, usually the approach is actually a little bit different than what I already shared. It will be kind of more on the exposure side of things. So we're going to create a hierarchy of, it's usually 1 to 10. So think of a situation that's like a 1. Basically, you're not anxious in that situation, or maybe just like ever so slightly, whatever that might look like. And then come up with an example for 2 and 3 and 4. And so usually it's kind of 1 to 10, 10 being like the worst social situation you can picture, and that, you don't even think you can get through.
Yeah, like
situation.
speaking on stage would
Probably,
be like,
yeah,
for some
something
people,
like that. Exactly. And so what we do is we kind of work our way through the hierarchy. So we start with 1, and we make a plan of when you're gonna expose yourself to that situation, but with a plan. So you're gonna do some of those strategies I mentioned: the square breathing, the grounding. My third one is self-compassion. So even engaging in some of that piece to prepare yourself for the situation. Then you go through it. And then afterwards, again, having tools ready to go to deal with if the anxiety spikes up. And then we continue to do that until we create habituation, which is you basically, after a while, you realize that worst case scenario is likely not going to happen, and that even if it does, you can handle it. Because that's the other piece. I think people often feel, if my worst fear happens, I can't handle it, when in fact, usually you can with the right tools. And so then we work our way through the hierarchy, basically, and then eventually people are able to manage much better.
Yeah, so sort of getting into a situation where, oh, this is the worst case scenario, and even and if this happened, I'll still be okay.
I'll be okay, and here's what I'm going to do if this happens, right? So you
Right.
kind of feel prepared. You kind of, there's this idea of coping ahead or planning ahead. A lot of times I'll talk with people. This will come up, let's say, if they're traveling or they're visiting family that maybe they don't get along with as well. Let's cope ahead. Let's think about, okay, what are the potential scenarios? Again, none of us has the crystal globe. We can always picture everything, but we can prepare. And then once we get through these situations, oftentimes people also realize, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Because again, we're our worst critics, like, and our brains are wired for negativity. So we picture the worst case scenario.
Yeah, it's funny because I do a little bit of that for myself, where I imagine the worst case scenario and almost put myself in that situation and just figure out what I would do and how I would act in that situation. Of course, it never happens the way, but I mentally prepare myself for
Yeah.
it. What if everything just stops and I'm homeless? And I was like, okay, well, if I'm homeless, I'll probably write jokes and that's make people laugh and maybe I'll become a comedian. You know what I mean? So I'll just have all these like plans ahead that I'll never probably use,
Yeah.
but it's kind of good to have. One thing you touched on that I thought was very interesting is self-compassion, because, well, tell me more about that, because I have my opinions on that. I want to share that with you and just kind of get yours.
Sure. So self-compassion, I kind of got introduced to it many years ago through my training. Kristen Neff, and EFF is her last name, kind of put it into the, more into the zeitgeist, as they say. She's a researcher who actually started through her own experiences, she shares in her book, but basically kind of came to realize, we're so wired for being critical, being negative, even within our culture, there's a lot of messaging around, like, if you just push yourself hard enough and kind of beat yourself up enough, like, you'll do better next time, right? Which, okay, maybe that is true in certain situations, but if that's your default, if it's always, and how many of us are defaulting is, even if we, stub our toe or do something silly, how often is the first thought is, oh, you're such an idiot, or you're such a this, or you're such a that, right? Like, we're just, our brains are just wired for that. And I think that kind of the culture and society reinforces it. So the idea with self-compassion is not that you're just going to be, oh my gosh, you're the best person ever. That's not it. It's, there's three components to it. So the first one is mindfulness. So again, that pause and just naming what's happening. So for example, again, I'm going to use my traffic example from this morning, naming that, okay, this stinks. My plan is not going to work out. The things that I thought I'm going to get to, I'm not going to get to because the traffic is insane and it's way worse than I thought. And, I'm disappointed because, and there's kind of the quick should started coming up. I should have gotten up sooner. I should have left sooner, right? The should started coming in, and just being able to notice that and say, okay, well, it is what it is. I'm right here. Like, so kind of the mindfulness, like I'm right in this moment. The second step is the common humanity. So really being able to recognize, okay, especially with something like traffic, it's me and everybody else who's late to things. I can look around to the other cars and see everybody's huffing and puffing and nobody's thrilled about the situation. So even just acknowledging, okay, I'm not the only one. And that's kind of the piece with the common humanity. Whatever we're going through, whatever we may have come up, being able to acknowledge everybody experiences pain, like everybody's frustrated. Everybody, at least once in their lives, has experienced X, Y, and Z, whatever the situation might be. So again, it's kind of taking it away from feeling I'm the only one. Because I think that's usually what triggers the negative talk, is feeling, right, I'm the worst parent, I'm the worst friend, I'm the worst this, that, and the other thing. And just acknowledging we're all human, we're all imperfect humans. And so we come with our flaws. And then the third piece is the self-compassion piece. So really thinking about, like, okay, what is one kind thing that I can say to myself in this moment? Like, what is one thing that I can say, okay, even if it's simple as like, may I be patient with myself, or may I be kind with myself, or even as much as like, this is really hard right now. So it's just, again, kind of almost like validation and acknowledging, like, this is a tough moment. And what her research has shown, that actually people who engage in self-compassion versus kind of more the self-esteem, kind of the self-critical piece that many of us engage in, again, when it comes to anxiety and depression, they actually see much more significant improvement, and just in general, they're kind of all areas of their lives start to come together, because again, we're not driven by this negative all the time. Now, especially if we make a mistake, I often have clients say, but Vesi, like, isn't this kind of letting myself off the hook? And again, it's not. You're acknowledging, again, back to the common humanity, you're acknowledging, let's say if it was truly a mistake, you're acknowledging the mistake. You're not lying about it or saying it didn't happen, but you're approaching it just from a little bit of a gentler perspective. And I think that makes a big difference. Especially a lot of the folks I work with struggle with a lot of these negative thoughts, a lot of people pleasing, a lot of just kind of putting other people first and not really taking care of themselves. So this is a really hard concept for a lot of people, and I usually get a lot of pushback initially when I bring it up, but we slowly get there.
Yeah, I think it's a hard concept. I think partly it's also hard to define what it is, so people don't understand what it is. Because as you're speaking through all of that, because I fell into the trap of what you said. I thought self-compassion is about kind of letting yourself off easy, and
that's why I like to mention the three components, because there's a lot of misconception around it. Yeah,
it made more sense because you have mentioned those previous components. And if you didn't, because it feels like self-compassion to me was before the definition was more like, oh yeah, I'm just letting myself off the hook, like, oh, this is okay. So to me, I almost made it synonymous to like complacency.
Yes.
But that's not what it is. It's not complacency.
No.
So how do someone practice self-compassion without being complacent?
Well, again, it could be as simple as kind of those 3 steps that I work through that I actually, Kristen Neff refers to them as like the self-compassion break. So again, just even working through those 3 steps, especially with the 3rd step, the actual self-compassion piece, I often say if you're struggling to come up with like, what do I say to myself? Because again, we're not used to that. I say usually think about if this was a friend, or if this is your child, or if it's your spouse, somebody that you care about, if they were experiencing what you're experiencing, what would you say to them?
Oh, that's
because usually we would not say, let's say if I saw you stub your toe, for example, and if your thought is, oh my God, I'm such an idiot, I wouldn't say that to you, like or vice versa. If you saw me do that, you wouldn't be like,
oh, you don't know my friends then.
Well,
true. I know, that's besides the point.
But you know what I mean? Like it's just immediately. Now, of course, is there people who talk like that to their loved ones? Sure, but I think the average person, I think in general, on the average, we tend to be, I think, much kinder and much nicer, obviously, to everybody else. But there's something about our wiring and kind of how our brains are wired that we give ourselves permission to talk to ourselves, I think, in a way that we rarely, if ever, will talk to somebody else. And so that's the piece again around self-compassion.
That's really interesting too. I never thought about that. Just taking yourself out of yourself and just, hey, what if I am not me, but I am like, maybe like I don't know, like a different person, right? I think I heard this where someone said, hey, what would your older self say to you now? And I thought that was a pretty powerful framework to think about. It's like, because if I were to go back in time and I can see like my teenage self or like my childhood self, and I'm beating myself up for failing certain whatever it is, like what would I say to this person? And it's definitely not say what I would have said to myself at that point in time.
Exactly.
So that makes perfect sense.
Exactly, that piece. And another question I think that sometimes helps is thinking about like, what do I need to hear right now? So maybe even if I'm not able to say it to myself, if my partner or loved one or mother or father, whoever is near me and saw me experience this, like what would I like them to say to me? So that's kind of another way to reframe it a little bit as well.
Right. Well, that might sound a little bit, for me, it might be a little bit harder because I don't know what I need to hear. Right? Because sometimes what you need to hear might not even be the one that, sometimes what you need to hear isn't even what you want to hear.
Well, there's that. There's that. It's definitely a lot of subtlety there. Yes, absolutely.
I love it. And to me, it sounds like you just have a lot of practical advice and the practical tips for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Versus, I think, versus a lot of other experiences that I might have with conversations is that there's a lot of impracticality to some of the advice. And not enough like tactical advice. And I think what we got today is just everything that you've given us has just been tactic. Like we can leave this podcast today and someone can go home and just use this thing that you have,
Right.
and it might just start to change like how they approach a lot of situations.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things that I talk to a lot of my clients is that one, it's small incremental changes. So that's why when I say the breath piece, I get the eye rolls, oh, what is this gonna do? And I usually say just kind of trust the process and just notice. And even if being able to build some of these mindful breaks throughout the day, as you get in the car, as you get out of the car, before you get into the house, just doing that square breath for like 30 seconds. All of us can spare 30 seconds at a time or a minute at a time. And what it's doing is also interrupting that cycle throughout the day. So if you're someone that is juggling, family and work and business and all kinds of things, it's so easy to get caught up in go, 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 right? All day. Before we know it, oh my gosh, where'd the day go? I haven't even had lunch, right? For example, right? It's so easy to be in that go mode. But again, what that's doing is amping up your nervous system all day long. And so even if nothing horrible happened, quote unquote, you might still feel kind of anxious by the end of the day because your system hasn't had time to kind of reset a little bit. And that's why I recommend some of these kind of shorter breaks throughout the day. The other key piece with some of these strategies, especially when it comes to anxiety, I often tell my clients is using kind of the fire drill approach. We need to practice those strategies before we get really anxious or before we get really stressed out. Because if you just wait until you're stressed, and oftentimes people come in and say, oh my gosh, this and that and the other thing happened, and I totally forgot all the things you told me. And it's like, well, of course you did, because you're in overdrive at that point. You're not going to remember. But if we're practicing them, again, these mindful breaks throughout the day, when the stressful situation comes, that pathway is already established in your brain. And so you're automatically going to go to that. Right? Versus maybe engaging, one of the other piece I work with a lot of clients is, replacing certain habits that are not as healthy for them with kind of these kind of strategies that are a little bit better for them and more healthy in the long run. So it's practice. That's kind of my joke. That's what my piano teacher in college used to do. Every time he would see me, instead of saying hello and goodbye, it would be practice. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the analogy I use. We need to practice on a regular basis all of this. It's mindfulness and taking care of our bodies, and obviously sleep and nutrition. I know you and I talked about this when we got together a few weeks ago.
Yeah, so you mentioned a word that really jumped out, is habit, right? Now, of course, to actually implement anything you do, we have to change habit because our life is really ran mostly on our own habits. Yep. Now, is helping people change their habits something that you do as part of your practice?
It usually comes up. I don't necessarily frame it in that sense, but yes, in a way, we're changing habits. People usually come to me saying nothing's working, or all the things that I'm doing are not working. I want a different way. And so in a way, yes, we are changing habits. And some of these habits, again, that's where kind of the therapy aspect of it comes. As much as I do the practical tools, I also, especially because of my social work training, I do like to look at the big picture. I always do a full assessment I like to hear about the client's background and their family and how they grew up and the messages they received growing up and everything that comes along with it, because it does shape us. For better or for worse, we are shaped by our experiences. And so we do look at some of those long-term patterns. Some of the strategies I mentioned, I typically would use those first if somebody comes with pretty acute anxiety or kind of they're really struggling. So we'll try to kind of take that down a notch first, obviously, and then we'll dive into, okay, but how did these behaviors that you've been engaging that are not working for you started to begin with, and where are they stemming from, and what are some of the core beliefs that you're carrying around with you, and how do we start to shift those? Because obviously if we don't do that, it won't be a long-lasting change.
Love it. So it sounds like you're really trying to get down to the root cause of the problem.
Yes.
And really have to look at this whole issue in a very holistic way and not just throw strategies at you,
Yes.
but really strategies I think in the short term can really help.
Absolutely.
But then after that, you're really looking for those big monumental changes where this person almost become a new person, a better version of themselves.
Right.
And for that to happen, we really got to get down to the core belief, the habits, and everything else.
Exactly.
Love it. So
Yep.
I love talking to you, Vesi. I think I
Thank you.
really jive with what you're about. Now, if someone wants to learn more about you, how can they find you?
Sure. You can visit my website, which is vhjones.licsw.com, or if you just look up my name, it's unique enough. I do pop right up. Same I guess it's username or I'm not very good with the social media piece of it, but same name on Instagram as well and LinkedIn. So feel free to follow. I do have a quarterly newsletter that just went out today, but next one will be going out in the fall. You can sign up for that on my website as well.
And I would like to let everyone know that Vesi is in person in Wellesley.
Yes.
And I think that's a very important aspect to point out because a lot of social workers now, they're doing everything virtual. And there's something about a person to person,
Yes.
in person, inside a space.
Yep.
I think that does so much in so many different levels that, I don't want to get into the whole thing. But yes, Vesi is in person. So if you're looking for someone who is in
I do
person that you could
both,
talk
but
to.
yes, I do a lot in person, and I personally prefer the in-person sessions because
the same
exactly
way.
that, it's nice to be able to see the body language, it's the energy in the room. It also allows people to take a break, driving to an appointment and then leaving the appointment, allows you some time to kind of process what we just discussed in the appointment versus online. It's so easy to go from meeting to meeting to meeting, and then there's no kind of decompression time as well.
No, I love it. I love all of that.
Well,
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.